Okay, so let's talk about one of history's most beloved saints, who also happens to be one of the most misunderstood. We're going to dive into the real story of St. Francis of Assisi. When you hear the name St. Francis of Assisi, this is probably the picture that pops into your head, right? Gentle, peaceful, surrounded by animals. Kind of like the original hippie environmentalist, a guy who could literally preach to birds. But the real story, ooh, it's way more dramatic than that. We're talking about a journey from a life of total luxury and ambition to one of radical poverty and faith. It's an incredible story of complete transformation. So, to really get Francis, we have to go back to the beginning. We need to meet the man he was before he was a saint, a guy named Giovanni di Pietro di Bernardone. So, Giovanni was the super charismatic son of a really wealthy merchant. His dad nicknamed him Francesco, which means the Frenchman, probably because he was obsessed with French culture and songs. And yeah, he lived the life you'd expect. He was the leader of the party pack, always throwing these huge, lavish get-togethers, and his biggest dream? To become a famous knight. But that whole world of parties and privilege, it was about to come crashing down. A series of events were about to happen that would change him and the world forever. The change really started with a couple of huge, life-altering events. First up, war. He joins a military campaign, gets captured, and ends up spending a whole year as a prisoner of war. Then, after his dad finally bails him out, he gets hit with this really serious illness. I mean, back to back like that. It just completely hollowed out all those dreams of being a knight. It kicked off this huge spiritual crisis, and that fancy, worldly life he used to love just felt totally empty. And then we get to the breaking point. His dad is furious with him and drags him to a legal proceeding in the town square. And right there, in front of everyone, Francis does something absolutely stunning. He renounces his entire inheritance in the most dramatic way you can imagine. He gives everything back, even the clothes he's wearing, stripping down and leaving himself with absolutely nothing. I mean, talk about a complete 180. This is the ultimate transformation. The guy who used to chase fame and glory on the battlefield is now chasing a life of total humility. The town's biggest socialite becomes a beggar, trading in his fancy clothes for a rough wool tunic and his wild parties for quiet prayer. Okay, so now he's a penniless beggar. He needs a new mission in life, right? And he finds it, of all places, in the ruins of a tiny little country chapel. He's praying in this run-down little chapel called San Damiano, and he has this incredible mystical experience. He hears a voice, which he believes is Christ, speaking to him directly from the crucifix on the wall. And this voice gives him a command that's going to set the course for the rest of his entire life. Now, at first, Francis took this command super literally. He started begging for stones and physically rebuilding the chapel with his own two hands. But pretty soon he had this realization that maybe the church that needed repairing wasn't a building. Maybe it was the entire community of believers. So his mission shifted from being a construction worker to being a spiritual reformer. He dedicated himself to rebuilding people's faith by living the gospel as radically as he could. And that kind of example, it attracts people. Followers started showing up, and before you know it, the Franciscan Order was born. This whole new way of life completely changed how Francis saw the world. He stopped seeing it as something to be conquered or owned, and started seeing it as a family to be loved and cherished. And you can really see this vision in his famous poem, The Canticle of the Creatures. I mean, he wasn't just writing nice poetry about nature. He genuinely saw a deep family connection with everything. He called the sun his brother, the moon his sister. It was this radical idea. Some have even called it a democracy of all God's creatures. It basically took humanity off its throne as the ruler of creation. And he didn't just apply this universal brotherhood idea to nature. He took it everywhere. Get this. In 1219, right in the middle of the Fifth Crusade, he does the absolute unthinkable. He walks across enemy lines, not to fight, but to have a peaceful meeting with the Sultan, Al-Kamil. Just imagine that, a courageous act of interfaith dialogue right in the middle of a brutal war. Fast forward 4 years, he's back in Italy, and Francis has another one of his revolutionary ideas. He wanted to make the Christmas story feel real for everyday people. He wanted them to experience the humility of it, not just as an idea, but with all of their senses. So what was his idea? It was so simple, but so revolutionary. He created the very first live nativity scene. He brought a real ox and a real donkey into a cave to recreate that stable in Bethlehem. It wasn't just for show. It was an invitation for everyone to feel the poverty and the humility of that moment. And just like that, with one simple act, he started a tradition that we still see all over the world every Christmas. All right, so let's talk legacy. How does this rebel from the 13th century still manage to shape our world today, almost 800 years later? Well, for one thing, his connection to Christ became so intense that, according to tradition, he actually received the stigmata, the 5 wounds from the crucifixion. The story goes that after a vision on a mountain, the wounds of the nails and the spear just appeared on his hands, feet, and side. He's actually the first person in recorded history said to have received. And his impact, it's just immense. You really can't deny it. The religious orders he founded are now all over the globe. He started one of our biggest Christmas traditions. And that peaceful trip to meet the Sultan, it actually earned his followers the right to be the official caretakers of holy sites in the Holy Land. Much later in 1979, he was officially named the patron saint of ecology. And then, in 2013, a pope chose his name for the very first time. So, the story of this wealthy party boy who became Il Poverello, or the Little Poor One, it leaves us with a pretty big question for our own time, doesn't it? We live in a world that's constantly screaming at us that more is better, that we need to consume more, to have more. And then there's Francis, this radical figure who says that maybe, just maybe, real joy isn't found in what we get, but in what we're willing to give away.